The next step in our project is going to be putting our actual compositions together. So I've got a background selected, I have some materials I want to work with, and feel free to change your mind as you're working. If you can see the space around me, it is cluttered and covered with all sorts of materials. So it might be that you're working on something. If it's not quite working out right, you might put it off to the side, grab something else. I've just selected a few materials to work with. You're welcome to work with more, with less, whatever feels right for you. So I've got my background, I've got some different size objects that I'm going to be working with, and now I'm going to start putting them together in my different compositions. So the first composition that you guys have to work with is called symmetrical, and symmetrical is where everything lines up along a vertical axis. So here, in this example, I'm going to put this at the top, and I'm going to make a very literal symmetrical composition just so that you get a good sense of it. So what that means is that if I folded my composition in half, it would mirror. And so what I'm doing is I'm just making sure that all my visual elements are balanced on either side. And there's lots and lots and lots of different ways to do this. I'm gonna grab a couple of those round plastic things I liked working with before. And this would be made even more symmetrical if I take this piece off. So you'll notice no matter how I fold this, this will be a symmetrical piece. So we're going to work with our compositions and then we're going to document them. So let's say that this is our composition. And of course, this can be much more kind of layered and developed in some different ways. Let's say that, remember talking about our recycled materials, it might be that I want to kind of tear some strips, layer it a little bit. Now, the thing to remember with symmetrical compositions is they're very static because everything is kind of very evenly weighted. Static is another word for there's not a lot of energy to a piece. So for me, I mean, they're very symmetrical, they're very pleasing, but they're not as dynamic as some other compositions that we'll look at. So anyways, I could keep layering this, I could keep building it. Once you have a composition in place that you are happy with and that you would like to document, we're going to take our cameras. And you'll have to crop these. We're going to work in Photoshop in a little bit. I'm going to zoom out so that I have everything. Everything's nicely, evenly lit. And then if I go here, there you'll see is my image. And we're going to be cropping them in Photoshop. I just want to give you a quick look at what that's going to look like without the grid behind it. So, you want to be thinking about how do I make this a dynamic composition? You are welcome to take as many pictures as you need to see what it'll look like. And oops, there we go. There is our image. So, there's a lot of different ways to play with this and to work with it. So the next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be playing with the compositional element of asymmetry. So a lot of times what I do is I take everything off, and keep in mind, I want you to have consistent elements between each one of your compositions, but you can really add or take away some things if you wanted to. So here I'm going to work on asymmetry, where in this case we're going to have an element balanced by other elements. So one side is going to feel in some ways where you don't have exact even amount of objects on either side. Instead, asymmetry. I tend to explain to students, kind of pushing something off to one side, making something a little bit more uneven so that it becomes more dynamic. And I really like these as kind of like little polka dots. Put one right there. So this is an asymmetrical composition. We'll take a picture and we'll crop it, and then we'll go on to our next one. Our next one is going to be vertical balance, where the vertical element of the composition is being emphasized. So here I might push the figure over a little bit. And notice I said vertical balance. I didn't necessarily say vertical symmetry. So you can maybe have one area that feels a little bit heavier than another. And now you'll see there's a vertical emphasis. And once again, we'll take an image, crop it in Photoshop, and then we'll go on to the next one. So our next one is going to be horizontal balance. And you can do this one of two ways. One is to emphasize kind of a vertical or a horizontal, line that you'll be working with. And experiment. It might be that you find that you want to cover up areas. And of course, I'm working quite quickly. In reality, I would be spending a lot of time working with these compositions and kind of perfecting them and making them feel how I want them to feel. Right now, it's just to kind of give you a quick idea. So here you can see there's a horizontal dividing line. Once again, we would photograph that. The next type of balance that we're going to be working with is diagonal. And diagonal can kind of go in any direction that you want. It can feel like it's weighted more to one side or less to the other side. Here I've got a diagonal line. And there's a sense of kind of a diagonal composition. The other type of composition that you guys can be working with is radial. Radial means it'll extend from a certain one single focal point. So here. And this can be really positioned anywhere in the composition. So I'm putting it in the middle just for simplicity's sake so that you guys can get a good idea right off the bat. But it could be at the top, it could be off the bottom, you could be having it hang off the edge if you wanted to. There's a lot of different ways to kind of play with radial balance. And then the last one, which is maybe one of the most tricky words to say, is crystallographic balance. And essentially what that means is that there's no one focal point. Everything has equal visual weight. So I'm going to start with kind of these elements. It's also referred to as an all-over pattern. Sometimes students find that easier to pronounce. Essentially, there's no focal point. And you'll see from some of the examples in the lecture kind of what that looks like. And of course I could layer these over and under in lots of different ways. There's so many different ways to kind of approach this. So an all-over pattern is very much kind of a pattern that is creating equal weighted elements within the entire composition. So for your project, like I just did, you're going to develop your visual language. And it might be that you take one try at this and you kind of like your compositions, and then you want to just kind of dump everything else off, say, that was interesting, but I'd rather do something different. Gather some more materials, put those materials down. Maybe you want to cut some sections out. So, and then maybe you come back and you're like, oh, well, this is a lot more interesting. I like this, and I want to play with that and create vertical, symmetry or vertical balance. So, there's so many different ways to play with the materials, experiment, play with the arrangement. It's infinitely variable. When you get to a happy place, definitely stop, take a picture, we'll edit it in Photoshop, and then we'll go from there. So I'm excited to see what everyone puts together for their collages. And remember, really experiment, play, and have fun.